When Valeria Shamoriai died unexpectedly in 2018, her children, Valeria and Janu, Andras Blazek's mother and uncle, reluctantly sold the family home on Shilistovska Street in Shamorin, a small Slovak town on the border with Hungary, also known by its Hungarian name, Shamoria. The name Shamoriai literally means from Shamoria, but the family was previously Schwarz, a trace of possible German origins. Indeed, the history of Shamorin is one of annexations, fractures, aggregations, splits. Shamorin is located in Zhitny Ostrov, a river island prized as the most fertile part of the Danubian flat. Granted status as a free royal town in the 15th century, it became part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire in 1867. A synagogue was built in the town in 1912, and by 1930, 60 years after the dual monarchy acknowledged the full legal rights of its Jewish subjects, an important Jewish community of around 300 people lived in the town. Census numbers reflect a majority Hungarian population, 90% at the turn of the century. In the Treaty of Trianon that dismantled Austria-Hungary in 1920, Zhitny Ostrov, previously treated as a Hungarian territory of the empire, became part of Czechoslovakia. In 1938, however, the Kingdom of Hungary under Regent Miklos Horthy negotiated with Germany to bring the area under its control. Horthy also banned the Communist Party, and violent repression of communism ensued. Under Hungarian rule until 1944, Jewish residents of Shamorin were deprived of property and civil rights. The majority were murdered in Auschwitz-Birkenau. This was the period when János Schwarz, Valeria Shamoriai's father, registered with the authorities as Shamoriai, from Shamoria. Whether this was done under coercion or of his own volition as a tactical maneuver to conform is unclear. However, after World War II, under Czechoslovak rule and Soviet control, the family carpentry business and large parcels of land were gradually confiscated. Valeria Shamoriai was allowed to keep a small plot titled under her name by her father for a house and a garden. Her brother designed the house and helped to build it with friends and family. The Hungarian population in the town has been in steady decline since 1991, 2 years before the so-called Velvet Divorce, when Czechoslovakia split into the independent Czech and Slovak republics. According to the Slovak census, it has fallen from 70% to around 50% in the past 30 years. The sale of the family house in 2018, therefore, ended a century of life on land that passed through 4 generations of bordering. Valeria Shamoriai was born Czechoslovak, became Hungarian, was Czechoslovak again, then passed away Slovak. In a 2009 work, artist Ilona Nemet, who comes from the same region, inscribed a statement from her grandmother on this condition in stucco on the wall of a gallery in Poland. I was born in the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, went to school in Czechoslovakia, married in Hungary, live in Slovakia, and I have never moved out of my native village. A year before the sale of the family house, Andras Blazek's project, History of a Split Between Islands and Dams, Circles and Lines, 2017, a companion work to the installation shown here in Stuttgart, which we opened with a photograph from, and of which we'll see a video walkthrough, was created for At Home Gallery, Shamorin's former synagogue, now a contemporary art space. Informed by this family relationship to Zhitny Ostrov, History of a Split visualized shifts in the town's social and environmental ecosystems using 3D modeling, drone survey, photogrammetry, architectural modeling, architectural molding of the kind used to create interior cornices with stucco, and the design for a cyclorama. The cyclorama is one that was used to plan the camouflaging of landscapes during World War II. Photogrammetry is a process that uses photographs to capture measurements that can be used in 3D modeling. Like the installation's simultaneous opacity and transparency, working with both photogrammetry and the physical framework for planning camouflage, every digital object has a double identity. On the one hand, it exposes the object from which it collects its data to the ideology of universal calculability, wherein everything is measurable. Yet at the same time, its very appearance black boxes or conceals its original form, the code that generates an image. Outside the entrance to the former synagogue of Shamorin, where the installation was shown, lies an accidental monument, a found object that memorializes the town's buried histories. The red star, toppled from a pedestal in the Shamorin town plaza, turned up in a field outside the town years after its dismantling in 1988, had revealed that its base was cut from the headstone of a Jewish grave. The same post-socialist suburbanization that eventually unearthed the Red Star and saw the former synagogue restored for contemporary art from its use as a warehouse transformed the social, rural, ecological, and architectural realities of Zhitny Ostrov. Ironically, the changes started with the realization of a socialist project, the Gabčíkovo Waterworks, planned in 1977, originally in partnership with Hungary. Neighboring Hungary discontinued its part of the project, which after 1989, many came to associate with Soviet rule. But the Gabčíkovo plan in Czechoslovakia moved forward, completed between 1991 and 1996, taking on the character of a symbol of national energy independence and an ethnicized Slovak state. 7-year-old Ondráš and his mother, Valeria, participated in Slovak opposition protests against the dam out of concern for its impact on the surrounding landscape. Protests in Hungary had succeeded in stopping the Hungarian side of the initiative. Ondráš made a placard for the demonstrations that he gave to a journalist who asked him if she could keep it for documentation. Politicians and newspapers represented the opposition ideologically, distracting attention away from the action as an effort to protect the Danube River ecosystems. Divisive rhetoric would insist that the protests were not an impressive, multi-ethnic, multilingual representation of an ecological Slovak future, but about refusing Slovakia its right to self-determination or a promotion of Hungarian supremacy and Czech domination. In recent years, Gabčíkovo has been the topic of numerous initiatives in contemporary art. The River Symposium on Art, Eco-Power, and the Liberation of Energy, German artist Axel Brons, Some Kind of Opposition, and more recently, Liquid Horizons, where geographer-activist Mikuláš Huba's documentation of the opposition movement against the dam was also exhibited. History of a Split, however, and this continuation of it on view in Stuttgart, working with data collected not from the dam, but from the surrounding landscape, is unique. A project by an artist whose formative experiences of the terrain around him were shaped by the aesthetic and affective consequences of populist environmentalities driven by new monumental infrastructure and administrative territorial reforms. The dam facilitated neoliberal transformations of the territory, whose rural realities were suburbanized and whose industries were privatized, then shuttered. It's also an icon of what has been called the post-ecological moment, one where the production of image events, rather than change in policies and practices, have become the focus of environmentalism. Nature is still not acknowledged as a cultural subject. History of a Split uses drones and 3D modeling to demonstrate how new technologies replicate the old systems that subjugated land to landscape, reducing it to measurable and calculable quantities that could be exploited for resource extraction, for energy. Rather than represent the changes to the landscape, it enacts them at a different scale to reveal their operating logics at work in contemporary data systems. The dam is always reified as a symbol, never part of the human and non-human systems of signs that is life. Experienced amidst the nationalist conservative propaganda of Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán's autocratic administration, History of a Split interrupts these ideological feedback loops. Orbán's government builds monuments that advocate a borderlessness with towns like Shamorin, aiming to renationalize self-identifying Hungarians who live beyond Hungary's limits. All the while, Hungary reborders its territories against migrants seeking hospitality and refuge. History of a Split is a silent withdrawal from the populist discourses that instrumentalize individual experiences of bordering in the region and continue to construct human subjectivity, whether as protectors or aggressors, in relation to a passive nature. As Hungarian novelist Laszlo Krasznahorkai writes, "Tai nincs," there is no Tai, no area, no region, no landscape, just lands, memories, and bodies transformed by sign systems under ideology, economic shifts, changes in land use, and geopolitical bordering. In the 1930s, Valeria Shamoriai's grandfather ran a nursery with land he took care of for the plants he sold. All the grandchildren had chores at the nursery, and Valeria liked to talk about the line digging drills she performed under her grandfather's critical eye. When Ondráš helped her in the garden behind the Chilistovska house, his lines always frustrated her. They were never as straight as she wanted. The engineers who planned Gabčíkovo Dam drew a line to articulate how the kinetic power of water would be harnessed, and Shamorin was forever changed. Longtime residents lament the town's absorption into the periphery of the Slovak capital, Bratislava. Distanced from the river, denuded of its forests and fields, it is dominated by single-family homes with manicured enclosures that refuse the old cultures of land care, only allowed to persist under the socialist modernization and industrialization of the landscape in private yards. Under consumerist land uses, these private yards, like that of Valeria Chamorriai, were the last vestiges of sensibility for the land. Now they are commoditized, replaced with small yards of grass, barbecue grills, and swimming pools. The people were left with dead water, journalist and geographer Tuba Lajos explained in a talk he gave on the dam at the inauguration of History of a Split at the synagogue in Chamorin. Dead water refers to both the rigorous line of the water channel and the reduction of a life force to a power source. People can't swim in the water or fish in it. Its social significance has waned. The water channel is not a fluid thread, but a border wall. After the protests, András kept a postcard in his room that showed a section of the water channel, newly installed but still empty, painted with a linear design. The mural memorialized the willows that were destroyed by the dam's construction. The postcard was printed to circulate Back to Nature, 1991, a work by Slovak-Hungarian artists Ilona Nemet and Marian Ravas. Ilona's participation in the protests as part of the artist group Studio Erte was reported in the newspaper Oiso, which reprinted the same image disseminated in the postcard. Ilona chose the willow because as a tree species common in the Danube's flood basin, it was impacted by the dam and its silhouette could represent the destruction of the landscape. The lines articulating the willow's branches also resemble the many wandering distributaries the river lost or that the dam blocked, obstructing sturgeon from movement between spawning grounds. In Ilona's painting, the thick lines of willow branches appear like cracks in the wall of the water channel, as if seeking to summon both popular will and a tectonic shift to breach its concrete. An old picture of the icy Danube shows Valeria Chamorriai and her husband, Jano Blazek, gathered with friends for a group photograph on the river's frozen waters. Another shows them under and atop an old tree near the riverbanks. Recently posted on social media to the Facebook group Old Images of Citizens of Chamoria, it's part of an ongoing virtual exchange of memories online that are connected to social use of the river. András and fellow artists Ilona Nemet and Sheila Nagy have their own virtual exchange of sorts on the transformations in the landscape through respective projects that they've presented at the former synagogue, all informed by land on the Slovak-Hungarian border. Their works converse with each other in ways that go beyond influence or inspired intent, engendering embodied relationships to territorialization, not just some kind of shared context. The at-home gallery at Chamorin's former synagogue was actually started as a project of Ilona's, an initiative co-founded with friends that aimed to make present the painful memory of the town's complicity in the displacement and murder of most of its Jewish residents. In 1996, Ilona mounted the second installation shown in the repurposed space, which was recovered from use as a storehouse for an appliance company in the early 1990s. Nemet's The Way, 1996, was created from 110 railway sleepers, the remains of the dismantled Chamorin train station. Though the sleepers may not be from tracks that literally carried Chamorin's Jewish citizens to death camps, the association of train tracks with the synagogue inevitably invokes the tragedy and directly implicates Chamorin. In Nemet's intervention, the sleepers lead visitors from outside the synagogue into the congregation space. Proceeding up the back wall, they bar the door to the ark that once held the community's Torah. As part of his own exhibition, History of a Split, held at the former synagogue in 2017, András also explored the landscape as locality on the ground, as well as from drone flights. He invited ethnographer Zsófia Nagy to show mind maps she created with area residents. András and Zsófia installed the mind maps on a balcony that in the synagogue's original use was reserved for women excluded from direct participation in the service. The view from the balcony on the congregation space opened over a display infrastructure that András built from a photograph of World War II era cyclorama used in camouflage design. The act of collective remembering looks out over the display of power below, alienated from the scene of action and decision-making. A projector screen behind a large plaster model made from the dam's silhouette using methods in architectural molding beamed painterly 3D renderings of topographical data. A motorized lamp circled the model, emulating the shifting position of the sun to indicate time passing. The mind maps on view showed the attention of older residents to spaces of indeterminacy, whose uses were not prescribed, but improvised. For example, a former barracks was used as a rest space in hikes to the old riverbank for fishing and friends, but when the dam was built, even preserved sections of it lost this purpose. With new distances imposed by disruptions to the landscape, cyclists and motorists replaced pedestrians, and in their mind maps, younger residents neglected the off spaces, focusing instead on the preeminently present dam, old riverbank, and main road. 2 years prior, the synagogue had hosted the Galanta-based artist Cila Nadia's Fourth House, 2015, a scaled-up iteration of a wooden maquette made by Cila's grandfather in 1974, around the time that Ondras's family house was built. The maquette was not intended as a dream house, and the design was based on a template shared among model builders, then personalized. When Cila's grandfather died, her grandmother kept the maquette with her wherever she moved, from Kralov Brod to Galanta, and then finally Bratislava. When her grandmother eventually passed away, Cila borrowed the maquette, then decided to rebuild it to a size that was neither the appropriate dimensions of an actual house, nor small enough to be taken for a playground toy. Inside the synagogue, the unfamiliar scale communicates estrangement from the relationship to land that's represented by the model, and alienation from the landscape, similar to that expressed in the mind maps of young residents in Zhitny Ostrov. The dismantled installations now stored under a canopy behind the house Cila inherited from her great aunt in Galanta, where she lives, has her studio, and keeps a garden. With the sale of the family home after her mother's death, Valeria Blazek, Ondras's mother, moved to a housing estate 30 kilometers away in Dunajska Streda. Similar housing estates have been built elsewhere in the area, the largest in Shamorin and Gabčíkovo, to house the families of workers employed at the dam and its hydroelectric plant. In 1999, the small city was the site of a massacre of a criminal gang whose activities were emblematic of the wild 90s corruption associated with suburbanization and its postmodern eclecticism. One report recently remembered the massacre as the biggest mass murder in Slovak history, forgetting to consider the Holocaust's impact on this once thriving center of Austro-Hungarian, then Czechoslovak Jewish life. Asked to compare the wild 90s to the present, one Slovak criminologist reflected, crime has changed its form, from violent, brutal crime into economic crime that's extremely difficult to detect and prove. History of a split reflects upon the way the modernist violence of universal calculability has been normalized in the postmodern technological systems being used to gather topographical data. Valeria Blazek had her own relationship to land use and reform in the region, having worked for years as a surveyor for Stavo Investa, a local engineering firm in Dunajska Streda specialized in contracting work, certified by the Slovak government to grant permits for construction projects. She remembers her parents were building their house for at least 3 years between 1971 and 73, while she worked for another architecture firm after high school. The house, designed by her uncle, Ondras's godfather, was among the first in the area with a flat roof. Others had pitched roofs with no more than 1 floor. Vernacular modernism and self-built homes enlisted residents in the process of transformation that Gabčíkovo's later modernization of the land around them would even more dramatically implement. A 2-story cubic volume in brick and plaster with an elevated ground floor, a basement, and a terrace, the house's footprint was rectangular, conceived for row houses, though never intended to accommodate such proximate neighbors. 2 shorter sides served as facade to a winding street and back access to the garden. Each floor was planned with 80 square meters of space and conceived with sections open to accommodate glass blocks for light, but with privacy. The glass block sections, however, were never realized. Instead, large windows were installed. Valeria's mother liked to sit with her dog in front of the ground floor picture window, looking out on her garden lines from behind the large panes of glass. In deciding what could be kept from the house in Shamorin, Ondras convinced his mother to conserve a shelf unit her father had built in the living room for the family's books and photo albums. His mother insisted on keeping all the books. A relative helped dismantle the shelf, and when Valeria was resettled in her new Dunajska Streda apartment, Ondras reinstalled the unit in the new living room. In a standardized socialist lab housing of Námestie Priatelstva, the shelf system brought something of the old self-built vernacular modernism of Shamorin with it. While it comforts and makes the environment feel less austere, it also reinscribes the patriarchal order's efforts to perform Hungarianness with the collection of literature it contains. The Baron's Sons about the Revolution of 1848, Requiem for an Army about the Second World War, and The Confessions of a Bourgeois, lamenting the loss of a progressive liberal post-Enlightenment European humanism. Ondráš has titled this part of the broader project on the Danube's transformations in Žitný Ostrov on view here in Stuttgart, Tai Ninch, after a short story from Laszlo Krasznahorkai's collection, The World Goes On. A compressed version of the story goes something like this.
Yes.
Quote, how lovely it would be, a world that we could end by organizing a series of lectures anywhere in this departing world, and give it the general subtitle, Lecture Series on a Theory of Landscape, where one after another, as in a circus arena, lecturers from all parts of the world would talk about a theory of landscape, and in front of a permanent, never varying audience, would relate their thoughts about landscape from their own respective point of view, keeping in mind the overall title for the lecture series, There Is No Landscape, so that they would speak about this, approaching it from their respective perspectives, under the aegis of a summary statement denying that the subject landscape exists at all. Given that we've reached a point where trapped in the bewitchingly confined space of the human viewpoint, we must arrive at the conclusion, beyond this bewitching confinement, we in fact insist on nothing else, not even on existence of any kind. We no longer insist on existence, only on the promise that for once, in some landscape amidst the most profound beauty and decay, we may glimpse something, anything that refers to us. Representatives from the Slovak Ministry of Transportation visited History of a Split in the middle of the show's run. They drove up to the former synagogue in 2 cars, stayed for a while, and then left in silence. They walked in, and amidst its most profound beauty and decay, glimpsed themselves in the feedback loop, seeking an entry point for an interference that can reorient existing systems to see the departing world around it taking leave, to be reconfigured beyond the splits of nature and technology, geometries and terrains, rivers and dams, land and landscape.